nobody trains and educates better than the military. So when corporate America asks me, hey, how do we develop people? I'm like, hire a veteran, and let them build your leadership development programs.
Welcome to the Tango Tango podcast. Real, raw, and unfiltered conversations with veterans and those who support them. Tune in, be inspired, and walk away stronger.
Welcome to the Tango Tango podcast. And as you can see, I'm wearing my Air Force colors today. Aim high, fly, fight, and win. And doing that because I have an amazing guest today. And never thought in a million years I would have her on the show. But please welcome retired Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force and, hey, Army brat. We have that in common. JoAnne Bass. So, Jo, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Lloyd. And it's really a treat to spend time with you. You know, I tell people all the time that the one thing about the military that is so awesome is regardless of how long you were in, we're all part of this military family. And so it feels like I'm hanging out with family. And so I'm very excited to spend some time with you and your audience.
Well, I appreciate that, Jo. And I was reading your bio and looking around, and I already knew a lot of things. I know you're an Army brat, like me. You're married to an Army veteran. And like me, you attended a bunch of schools, but you graduated in a high school in Hawaii. But before you got to Hawaii and kind of had some stability, where are some of the other places you lived as an Army brat?
So I did grow up all over. I remember my dad being stationed at Fort Sheridan in Illinois. We spent time, I think, 2 tours in Germany as a kid. We spent time in Utah. He was assigned there on his last tour in Germany on my senior year. He PCS'd with orders to Hawaii. And so that's what took me there on my senior year. And I tell people that all the time because life as a military kid certainly isn't easy, right? Like we don't have a say-so in when our parents have to change their assignment. And so that takes a little bit of appreciation as we ask communities and people to really just understand the level of commitment and sacrifice that our military families give. So that's me.
So yeah, my oldest son, 3 high schools, 3 different states. So it was tough for him, but it did build some resiliency. So do you remember where your dad was stationed in Germany, where you were at?
I do. He was, some of those bases are closed down. You know, he was stationed at Heidelberg at one point. Okay. He was stationed at a place called Schwäbisch Gmünd. We were also stationed in Wiesbaden. In fact, that's where I started high school. Got my first job working for AFBs at a pizza place at 15 and a half years old, back in the day when, parents didn't give their kids money. And so because I had to cry to get $5, I remember thinking, man, I've got to get a job. Yeah. So pizza place for AFBs is where I worked, and that was in Wiesbaden.
Yeah, that's great. So and then we'll get into it later on. You were able to spend quite a bit of time stationed in Germany as your Air Force career, which is, I kind of did the same thing. My mom's German. My dad was in the Army, spent half of my life in Germany, and then had the pleasure to go back in the in Air Mobility Command at Ramstein. So I know you were in the 86. But before we get there, let's just take it back to your high school. So you're in Hawaii. You're starting a high school. Was it a high school with a lot of veterans kids, a lot of Army brats, or was it kind of a local high school?
So not a ton, right? I graduated high school from Mililani High School in Hawaii. There were certainly some military kids, which every military kid typically tries to go find the other military kids because we're used to being, new and figuring out how to make friends. And so there were some, but not a ton. There were mostly local kids at my high school there. I also feel like, Lloyd, I feel like you've done some digging in my past life because JoAnne Bass was not a great high schooler in Hawaii. There's as I served, and I never shared a lot of, kind of background while I was serving. And then as I became a chief, I started to share more. And I remember telling a story about, I think I was talking to a group of maintainers, but I was sharing a story about how in the year before I joined the United States Air Force, I'm on the island of Oahu, and there's not a ton to do there. And certainly as a military brat, you can get in a lot of trouble. And trouble is what I got into. And enough trouble that I was actually banned from every military installation in Hawaii. So imagine that,
Wow.
right? And
really?
By the way, my dad's an Army warrant officer, so it was just bad news bears. And I'll never forget, he told me, I was in delayed enlistment, by the way. I'd already graduated high school and waiting for my time to come up. And my dad was like, do not tell your recruiter you're going to the mainland until your time is up. And so I joined the Air Force, never told anybody that I was banned from every military installation in Hawaii. And so, I only share that story because I tell people you too can be a chief master sergeant in the Air Force, right? Like there is promise out there. And when I share that story, I'll never forget because the aircraft maintainers were like, she's one of us, right? So anyway, it was a great story. But I feel like I knew something, and I'm like, man, why is he into Hawaii? What's
that? That's absolutely wonderful. So you have a little spice to you. In high school, I wasn't a troublemaker, but I was a poor student. And for those of my viewers and listeners know that if it wasn't for my late wife, I would have probably not made it through that final year of a high school. Or would have barely scraped by. She really helped me out a lot. But then with my kids, they were like, hey, Dad, we see your report cards. You were terrible. And then I show them like, hey, I got 46 A's in a row in college. So the Air Force taught me how to be a great student. They taught me discipline. And then I imagine you have kind of the same story. It sounds like you were lacking a little bit of discipline as a teenager in Hawaii, and on delayed enlistment, you go back to the mainland, you join the Air Force. And what career field were you?
So I came into the Air Force open general.
Oh, did you?
That was back in the day when you didn't know what your job was going to be, and you get a job when you're in basic training. And so I came in as formerly a 271 1 Charlie 0. But what that means to everybody is I was aviation management. So I was an ops person. But one thing that you made me think about is most of us have all heard somebody say 4 years in the military never hurt anybody. And that was really why I joined. I heard my dad always say 4 years in the military never hurt anybody. And at that point in my life, I was not mature enough yet to go to college. I was accepted to college, but I wasn't mature enough yet to go to college. My dad was not going to pay for college, by the way. And so I needed to figure out life. And so I held him to his word, which is 4 years, never hurt anybody. And that is really what caused me to join and then become aviation manager in the ops world, which I think was so helpful for me, that particular career field, because what I learned from that career field was operations, but I also understood the significance of support. And so I could understand in totality where everybody fits into the mission and how you can't do the mission without your support folks. And that lesson has continued on even, as Chief Master in the Air Force, and then certainly in this new chapter for me, as I spend time with corporate leaders, I'm like, it's all about the people.
That's wonderful. And as a first sergeant, retired first sergeant, I love the motto of the Air Force first sergeant is people are our business. And I've taken that to corporate America and in my community service, and it served me very well. But I absolutely love the lesson you learned that there's all those parts that, that are needed to accomplish a mission. It took me a long time to figure that out. I was a aircraft load master for most of my career, the first 3 years operationally in Charleston. And then I went into flight test for 8 years. And then it took me an assignment outside of flight tests. I went into the TALC, which they call CRGs now. And then I started deploying, and holy cow, I figured out that cargo in the back of the airplane is important. and and that really re-blued me, and really loved flying in the first half of my Air Force career. And in the second half, I can say I loved the Air Force because of being able to piece those things together. And then the icing on the cake was becoming a first sergeant and actually stepping away from aviation and into a medical group of all places, and then a comm squadron. So I absolutely love that perspective. But getting back to you, so you go through tech school, and your first assignment is, if I remember right, North Carolina, Fort Bragg.
My first assignment was indeed Pope Air Force Base, right near Fort Bragg, North Carolina at the time. And what's interesting is, being an Army brat, never having been stationed on the East Coast, I didn't even know like where Fort Bragg or Pope Air Force Base was. I was like, you could have said I was going to the moon. I didn't know. And I'll never forget being in tech training. And I'm like, where is this place? And everybody's like, oh man, they're like, you're going to No Hope Pope. You're going to Vietnam. And everybody's like, you're going to hate it. Yeah. Right. Like, and so I'm a little stressed out. I'm this 18-year-old who's hearing all of this. And what I learned is, you have to take that kind of feedback with a grain of salt, because fast forward, I go to Pope. And what I learned is that Pope is actually, there's a lot of hope at Pope. And I had a phenomenal time. And I met my spouse there, and I had phenomenal supervisors there, and we had a strong mission. And, and I was there at a time where I needed to start to create the foundation of who I was. And it was the exact place that I was supposed to be. And I couldn't have been more excited for being stationed there.
Awesome. So you met your husband there. Tell me a little bit about your husband.
JoAnne Bass. So he's an 82nd Airborne guy. We met like literally the week, or maybe it was 2 weeks after I got there. But this is, Lloyd, this is early 90s. This is when we still had NCO clubs. And for your audience who maybe doesn't know what that means, I mean, back then there was more community going on base, right? And so we hung out on base, still getting in, not a lot of, still doing what we do, right? Like, so I went from getting in trouble at 18 years old before I joined the military to, I'm still not too far removed. All of the Air Force started giving me core values and telling me I'm part of an Air Force family and all this. But anyway, we meet at the Fort Bragg NCO Club. Not proud of it, but it is where we met. And we dated for several years and then got married. And the other real big fun thing is, like we started going to church on base there, the chapel, and those folks just bring you in and suck you in. And then I started talking like I was from North Carolina. And so all the things. But Ron was an 82nd Airborne paratrooper. I met him when he was a private first class. In fact, when he used to come and visit me on Pope Air Force Base, he used to drive his Humvee, which I'm pretty sure isn't authorized, but he'd come in his Humvee and it would say PFC Bass. And, we were young then. We didn't necessarily have cars. And almost 30 years later, we're still together.
Yeah, I love it. I love when you post pictures of Ron Bass on LinkedIn. And pictures of the family. So and I always have. I've always thought that's it just showcases who you are, and a family is important, church is important. Love that. And how many kids?
We have 2 kiddos, 2 girls, 25 and 19-year-old, and they're really the joy. And in this next chapter, this chapter I'm in right now is really just special because I'm able to pour back into the kiddos where, I really didn't as much.
Oh, yeah, awesome. We got that in common too. My sons are 6 years apart, and I have a really cool thing is that I'm a granddad now, so I have a 5-year-old.
Congratulations.
And grandkids are so much better than kids. So,
well, we kind of know what we're doing now. So,
although I do have this sinus infection, from my grandson. I was up in Chicago this last weekend, and he's a walking CDC lab, but he gets over it very quickly, and us older adults suffer with it for weeks, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
so you spent a considerable amount of time in Fort Bragg, Pope Air Force Base. Did you and Ron ever have any assignments where you were not together?
Yeah. For all of our career, we were very blessed, very fortunate to primarily stay together. And when I say that, I mean relatively close. Anytime you get married when you're in the military, you kind of have an understanding of its needs of the Air Force or needs of the Army. And we knew in our case, it was needs of both. So we were stationed together most of our career until we started getting senior. And that doesn't mean, though, that we weren't like an hour or sometimes even two apart. Like our time, especially during our first tour in Germany, he was about an hour and a half away from Ramstein. And we had figured out, well, we'll just do our best to live in the middle in Germany. And so I'll drive 30 minutes and he'll drive maybe about 50 minutes and we'll figure that out. And it's tough. There's sacrifice associated with that because at the end of the day, like military life for any branch of service isn't easy. The deal being a loadmaster, right? Like our hours and being an ops person, our hours aren't, 9 to 5. And so we were always those years of being together and sometimes being 2 hours apart or an hour apart were really formative to who we were as a couple and as a family because of sometimes those challenges made us stronger. But our kids were always the ones who were at the child development center at daycare until like exactly 6 o'clock, right? Like my kids were the ones who were in their, coats and waiting for us to come pick them up. And there might've been 1 or 2 times where Ron and I are calling each other and like, do you have the kids? Do you have the kids? And nobody had the kids. So that was us. But there were a few times, by and large, we were almost always together until our more senior tenures. And then it just got too hard and we were in different states and that wasn't helpful.
Yeah, I bet. So Ramstein, what was your first assignment at Ramstein? What'd you do?
Man, you're making me go way back. You should have told me to go look up my military records. So first assignment, I did a quick stint at, I think, the flight records office, but that didn't last long because if I recall, an email went out. Back then we had email too, but an email went out and said, hey, there's a job opening at the time, USAFE AMOC, and that was Air Mobility Operations Control Center. And essentially to all your non-military folks or your military folks, that was just where AMC led, but it was where our ops center was to be able to control all the air assets that are in and out of the European theater. So a job ad, if you will, or request for personnel comes out. And I remember everybody in my career field was like, nope, not it, right? Like, do not apply for that. We'll never see you. You're going to go over and work on, kind of a higher headquarters level and we never see you. Like, don't do it. But I've never shied away from opportunities that other people have said no. And so for me, it kind of intrigued me. And I thought, okay, I'll kind of throw my name in the hat. And I end up getting picked up for the AMOC. And that was a game changer. I think I served there for about 3 years where I was a airlift scheduler, a DV airlift scheduler. So I took care of supporting all the distinguished visitors, getting in and out of the USAFE, the European and Africa and kind of as well as Middle East area. We would put them on C-21s, C-37. I think we had a C-40 at the time. And so that was pretty fun. It was a bit of a kind of offshoot from my career field, but I learned a lot. I learned a lot about kind of scaling airlift at a larger scale and not just what I might have learned if I stayed in a unit and worked kind of a smaller operations.
Yeah, that's very cool. So did you ever guess in a million years when you were scheduling DV airplanes that you would be on the other end of that and having people schedule airplanes for you?
No, but it was kind of good background to have, because when they would tell me whether or not they had aircraft, I'm like, oh, I know they have aircraft, right? Like, so, so it was kind of cool. I could have scheduled my own dip clearances and landing, all of that stuff, because I know how to do that, but never in a million years. And I say that because at that time, I'm a new mom. I'm a spouse. I'm a brand new non-commissioned officer at the time. And at that season in life, I was just trying to survive. You're just trying to survive. You don't necessarily know what's next. That was also during 9/11. And I'll never forget that period. So, right, like you just didn't, I didn't plan out 20 years ahead of time. Yeah. You just plan through that assignment. And then, if the assignment was good and you're still able to serve and you're still loving life, then you re-enlist and you keep serving.
Yeah, that's another thing we have in common. I was at Ramstein with my late wife and family during 9/11. Did you go to the NCO Academy over there?
I did. Yeah. Did you?
Yeah. When did you go?
No, I don't know. You guys need to look that up on Wikipedia, although Wikipedia is not always true for your audience.
I know that. So
remind me to share that story when we get there, but I'll share how I know everything's not true.
Yeah, so I actually went to the NCO Academy. My entire unit deployed after 9/11, and they and not me. They sent me to the NCO Academy. So I went to the NCO Academy. That date I'll never forget. I'm horrible on dates, but that was October of 2001, and I was really angry that I didn't get to go with my unit. But wow, did it really again re-blew me. I came in there and got to spend time with, again, a bunch of other career fields, gained confidence in myself. I was like, wow, I'm a pretty good student. I can speak, and did really well. Won the Commandant's Award and DG. And those are the first awards I had ever won, and really set me up for a great foundation for later on. After you spent a considerable amount of time in Germany, what was your next assignment?
So my next assignment out of Germany was actually right back at Fort Bragg. And so met my husband, was stationed at Pope Air Force Base, went to Germany for 5 years. We were actually only supposed to go for 3 years, but we kept extending because we loved it so much. So we did 5 years in Germany, and then got picked up to go right back to a data mask unit in the Fort Bragg area. And so that's all I can say about that tour.
We can kind of get to that. So if you don't know data mask, go to ChatGPT. So and then you can kind of figure out. Very, very cool. So I won't ask you any questions about that, because I don't need any calls from anybody. So at this point, you're starting to grow as a leader, I imagine, and you're starting to get airmen. And what was that, like, that transition from being a staff sergeant where you might have 1 or 2 troops to now, you're making it into the senior NCO, and you're directly or indirectly supervising and managing dozens of people?
Yeah. I went in Germany, I went from senior airman to staff sergeant to tech sergeant. And when I made tech sergeant, we're just going to rewind just a little bit in Germany. When I made tech sergeant, I remember I was still at that ops center. I remember reaching out to my functional manager and asking them if they could put me down at the wing again, because I felt like if I'm going to be a technical sergeant, a technical expert, if you will, I need to get back to my roots and be in the career field and understand the majority of the career field if I'm going to lead, right? Like, and any career that you have in the Air Force, you can sometimes spend years away from your actual career field, but it'll make it tough on you in the future. And so I knew that. So I asked if I could come back to the career field from that ops assignment, and they agreed. And so I went on, and I was the NCOIC of the flight records office, which I was probably keeping your flight record, Lloyd. And so that was helpful, because it was there in Germany where I started to learn what it was like, again, to supervise and kind of supervise people who were taking care of a mission set that was huge, right? We used to share in the military. We would share with people all the time. If you want to grow leaders, send them to Ramstein or a place like Kadena. You send them to these large bases where we're doing everything overseas, and so you're able to understand all those functions. So that's where I really started to hone the supervisory skill sets, because I was a non-commissioned officer in charge of that. I ended up making master sergeant, so senior NCO, and I can't remember the timing of that when I went to the data mass unit. I want to say that I might have pinned on like literally a week before I got there, or maybe it was right afterward. But in any case, what I learned very quickly is when you become a senior NCO in any branch of service, people don't care if you had it on for a week or if you've been a senior NCO for 5 years. They expect you to know your stuff, and it's not going to be given to you. And so you have to learn really quickly how to be resourceful and reach out to your network to be able to become the person who has the answers. And I remember having my own little private pity parties where I'm like, woe is me. You know, I'm a brand new master sergeant, staff in a function that they want me to, I'll never forget that the commander was like, hey, we need you to submit a ESSS staff summary sheet, and it's got to get to headquarters Air Force, the Pentagon. And he said it like, no big deal, right? And I'm like, staff summary all the way up to the Pentagon, like you got to create a package and you actually have to know what you're doing. And so that was daunting. But what it forced me to do is to, again, network, learn the ways, and know my stuff. And so that was one thing that I remember about becoming a senior NCO.
Yeah, networking is so important. Holy cow, when you become a senior NCO and then become a first sergeant, as well as leaning on those around you in different units that you can reach out to and get advice and guidance. I remember when I pinned on my diamond as a first sergeant, and I think one of the first meetings I had with a room full of officers, I started talking and they started writing down what I was saying. And I was like, oh, holy cow, with great responsibility comes great responsibility. I better be very careful with what I say and what I do. So let's take it back to, you talked about networking. Who are some of the mentors that helped you grow as a leader?
I love that you asked that question, and here's why. I think I had a lot of mentors throughout my career. What's interesting is the majority of them never even knew they were my mentor.
Yeah, me too.
Right? Like mentorship wasn't really a word when I was coming up in the military. Like it just became a thing somewhere in the 2000s, and it kind of became an awkward thing because, we mentored for years and years and years, and it was just something that people did, right? Like no frills, no charge. They kind of put their arm around you and they were like, hey, here's what you need to do. Here's how to succeed in your career. And so I had a ton of mentors that mentored me in different spaces. I had some that I watched how they communicated, and I thought, man, I want to learn how to communicate like that, verbally and written. There were some that mentored me because I appreciated how maybe I saw them parent or how I saw them engage their network. And so there were so many mentors, too many to count, and they never knew who they were. But I will say that probably if I had to pinpoint one person, I would, again, give credit to my husband, who I don't give enough credit to because he, at the same time, had a separate career in the United States Army. And I tell people all the time, he's a way better NCO than I'll ever be. He just has strong leadership skills. And so he taught me a lot of fundamental principles about playing the long game and not making decisions based off how I feel and take the hard right and not the easy left. And all of those things he taught me to help me be a better leader. And so I'd say my husband was probably my biggest mentor.
Awesome. Maybe a featured guest on a Tango Tango podcast. So absolutely love that. And I do recall seeing that in a LinkedIn post that I thought was absolutely phenomenal. So now you have these, you have these great mentors. You go into a position where you get a technically proficient you start to build yourself up. You're now a senior NCO. Talk a little bit about the progression to, we're not even going to get the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force yet, but the progression to become a Chief Master Sergeant.
Yep. So this is now at the previous unit that I was talking about, 5 years, and we end up getting an assignment. In fact, I think my husband first got the assignment back to Germany. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, yes, we'd love to go back to Germany. So we went again, started our trek back to Germany. Now, this time I'm going as a senior master sergeant. And now, instead of being the non-commissioned officer in charge of the flight records office, now I'm coming back as the superintendent in the SEL, which then I also wore another hat, and I was the squadron senior enlisted leader. And so that was really formative for me as well, because I came back, knew the mission already, just took on more responsibility, and then also had to take on the responsibility of leading the entire organization. And I know you know, Lloyd, but for everybody, I was the senior enlisted leader of an operational support squadron. And so those are your air traffic controllers, your base ops, your weather folks. So everybody that makes a flying mission happen falls under that squadron, if you will.
And one of the busiest Air Force bases in the entire world as well.
Yes. And so it was really cool because I started to learn, how to lead at scale, lots of different career fields and career fields that are to some degree siloed out. So how do you then start to create a organizational culture, bringing in people from different silos and becoming a happy family? At the same time, learning what my role was to support my commander and make sure that the commander succeeds. And that's what I tell people all the time. Like our roles, our job should be that we help our bosses succeed, because if they succeed, then the organization's winning. And so that was a really important time. And I'll never forget, by the way, when I got in that position, the previous person shared with me, have fun on your assignment here. Nobody ever makes chief out of here. And I thought, well, thank you for that. Welcome. And what that showed me, because I did make chief out of there, is you can never listen. You can't let other people kind of limit your own goals and et cetera, right? What's meant for you is meant for you, and that's what's going to happen. And so I did make chief out of there, and I fleeted up from being the squadron chief, then to the ops group chief. Phenomenal opportunity as a group chief, because now you're interacting with all the other group chiefs on base, and you're really starting to understand how an installation and a wing mission happens. And you're also learning a lot about peer influence and peer leadership. And if you can lead your peers, then you can lead anything. And I was also part of some professional organizations that helped me develop those leadership skills, because again, one of the toughest cohorts of leadership is typically your own cohort. In fact, I used to tell people all the time when they'd say, hey, what's your biggest challenge? I was like, other chiefs are my biggest challenge, right? But when you can learn how to jointly partner and lead with your peers, that's the best network ever.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. I was the acting first sergeant for Headquarters Air Mobility Command for a little bit, and I think I had 16 airmen and 35 chiefs. So it was an interesting environment. So yeah, so that's absolutely wonderful. So your next step up, you become a Chief Master Sergeant. So for those of you who might not be familiar, in the U.S. Air Force, only 2% of the force is a E8 or Senior Master Sergeant. Then only 1% of that our total force is an E9 or Chief Master Sergeant. Then within the Chief Master Sergeant, you have different levels and different assignments of responsibility. So you could be at an individual unit that we call squadrons, and then you can work your way up the groups and wings and numbered air forces and commands. So what was your first kind of assignment above the squadron level?
So I went on from being a squadron chief to the group chief. And then after that assignment, I competed. Well, I got selected to be a command chief, and then you compete for assignments. I competed for assignments, and I got picked up to go be the command chief at Goodfellow Air Force Base in San Angelo, Texas. And that was a really cool opportunity. So now I'm in a kind of command pathway, if you will. And we had been in our second tour in Germany, after 5 years. And I share with my husband, I'm like, okay, now my, track is going this way. And the Army had to kind of figure out what they were going to do with Ron if I was getting picked up to go to San Angelo. And so they were great. And they said, hey, we don't have anything close by, but we'll send him to Fort Bliss. Oh, no. I'm sorry, to Fort Hood at the time. And so he goes to Fort Hood, which is, I don't know, I think about a 3-hour drive. And at that time, we were like, well, I'll be in San Angelo. He'll be in Killeen, Texas. We'll see each other every week, right? Like we made all these plans, and then we get to our respective bases and life happens and you're exhausted by Friday. So we really saw each other probably at least every 3 weeks is what it was. The kids came with me. He went to Killeen. He served as Army First Sergeant there, and I'm on the command chief track. And it was all the things, right? Like I loved the opportunity to lead at that level. Goodfellow Air Force Base is known for training our intelligence professionals as well as all of Department of Defense firefighters. So it was a training base, and to get in a training environment, there's nothing more special because you're with folks that are so excited to serve their nation that it's just inspiring. At the same time, it was super taxing because, again, my husband's stationed about 3 hours away. I've got the kiddos. At that time, I think one of mine was in high school. The other one was in middle school. I have probably one of the most, in my mind, stressful jobs out there, and I'm single parenting it. I had to find somebody who could pick my kiddos and take them to their sports practices and all those things. And although it was one of the most rewarding jobs I've ever done, and I learned a ton, and I think I served well, it took its toll on me personally. And nobody ever knew, Lloyd, except my own kids. Like they knew that I was mentally exhausted, physically exhausted, because when you're mentally exhausted, the first thing that pops off is your own PT and your own sleep and your own eating well. And so nobody knew that except my kids, because when I went to work, I put the mask on and like life was good. And so that was an interesting time for me. And it only lasted 14 months before I got the notorious phone call from the Chiefs group that says, hey, the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force at that time wants you to come to the Pentagon and lead professional military education. So that was interesting. And I remember calling my husband up at the time saying, dude, like I'm about to retire, right? Like this, like nobody serves for 20 something years and then says, send me the Pentagon. Like that's just not it's not what people do. And again, my mentor husband, sage advice, he's like, don't get it twisted. He's like, the Air Force isn't sending you to the Pentagon. The good Lord is. So you're going to accept and you're going to go. And I'm like, fine. Right. Like, okay. So I go to the Pentagon and I'm being told all these things like we'll make sure that your husband gets stationed there too. They couldn't make that promise. Right. Like the Army's like, he just got to Killeen, Texas. We're not moving him. We don't care what the wife is doing. And so now here's my husband in Fort Hood. Here I am in the Pentagon with the kids again. And so it was at that time we had to make the decision on what to do. And he felt like, my career was going fast. And so he said, hey, I've at that time served 27 years. So he chose to retire and then became full-time dad and realized like life was amazing. He's like, I should have retired a long time ago. So anyway, so that was kind of the Goodfellow phase. So in addition
now to having a husband that had availability to really directly support you in person, Going back to that burnout, I mean, you had that burnout and you're getting ready to step into a huge job as Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. Were you able to develop any tools or to help you kind of prevent from getting back to that for your next assignment?
That's you're 2 jobs ahead of me.
Yeah.
So when I go to the Pentagon that time, I wasn't going to be Chief Master in the Air Force. I was actually going to be the Chief of PME, which is still a huge job because, to be honest, right, like you're an ops person, I'm an ops person. I remember telling my husband, like, I don't know how they even found my name to be the Chief of PME. I said, I don't even love PME, right? Like, sorry, Jim Cody. But anyway, I was like, I don't even love PME, but now I do. And so I'll share why, right? Like as an ops girl, I did not appreciate the deliberate development because I didn't know. I didn't know the deliberate development that the military does to ensure that their service members are the best trained, most educated, best developed people, which is why when we say our NCO Corps is our competitive advantage or the backbone of the military, it's true, but it doesn't happen by accident. It happens because we develop and we train and we educate. So now I'm the person who's in charge of that. But what's pretty cool is my background for the last 20 plus years helped me come into it with a different sight picture where I understand that the role of education, but I also understand the role of what the military does operationally, and they all have to complement each other. And so I got a chance to work at the Pentagon for 2 full years. And I'm not going to lie, Lloyd, like it sucked, right? Like Pentagon life is not fun. Like you're parking like 3 miles down the road. By the time you get into your cubicle at the Pentagon, like you feel like you worked a full day, like it's a whole thing. But what it did do is teach me how to make enterprise level change. It taught me how to, move the machine around, and it taught me just scale of developing the force, which then, so after 2 years of that, primed me for my job before Chief Master in the Air Force, which was at Keesler Air Force Base's 2nd Air Force.
So, neat. I think the Air Force does such a good job with PME. When I moved into corporate America, some of the ideas I had, they were like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. What an amazing idea. And I was like, are you kidding me? We teach at the senior airman at Airman Leadership School. Right?
I know. Nobody trains and educates better than the military. So when corporate America asked me, hey, how do we develop people? I'm like, hire a veteran. And let them build your leadership development programs. But you said something before I kind of went on a bit of a tangent. You said, how did you learn from the resiliency piece? Correct. From Goodfellow not being very resilient and not doing the things that I need to do to take care of me? It was an eye-opener to come to the Pentagon, mostly because that assignment allowed me to have some bandwidth because now I'm a staff person. I'm not at a wing. And being a staff person, I had some more time with my family, and they were really able to show me and tell me, and they told me before, I just was so busy that I didn't listen, but they were able to tell me that you're not doing a good job taking care of yourself and you're not doing a good job taking care of us. So you've got to fix that. And so it hit me just like that if I'm going to be my best, if I'm going to be my best airman, leader, chief, I've got to take care of myself, and I have to do it physically, mentally, socially, and spiritually. It has to become habit. It has to become my default routine, and I shouldn't feel bad about it. And so it was that assignment, and had already been in the military about 24 years where I first started to learn how to take care of myself so that I can be better for everybody else. Yeah,
it's in the Air Force. I'm this old. I was in the Air Force when they came out with the core values, and and service before self was always an interesting topic of discussion. And then one of the things we'd always get into is like, hey, you've got to take care of yourself, like, right? And, you know, if you're not taking care of yourself, you're not going to be able to do all those other things, and you're not going to be able to manage the service component of it.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I agree. You know, I would say that I tell people all the time that service before self doesn't mean despite yourself.
Yeah.
You know, it means kind of service before your own selfish ambitions, but you still got to take care of yourself. And it certainly doesn't mean service before family.
Absolutely. So I want to fast forward just for time's sake, and because when you came, you know, my listeners and viewers know I graduated from the Bush Institute Veterans Leadership Program, and you're one of the wonderful speakers that came down. And I absolutely loved your story about becoming the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. And I asked the Sergeant Major of the Army, retired Princeton, his story, and really want to dig into yours, because I think it's absolutely wonderful and absolutely horrible. You know, some of the things that happened and appalling, but I really think it showed that resiliency you were able to build. And so let's just go back to that. When did you get the initial like call, and who called you that you were in kind of the short list to become the next Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force?
So it was COVID time frame 2020 when the process for the next Chief Master Sergeant in the Air Force started. And I'll just fast forward because we could talk about this a lot, but I'll just fast forward to, you know, it went from like quite a few people to short list. And when I was on the short list of there's 3 of us left, and we had went through numerous kind of interview processes during the time. I remember my exec at Keesler Air Force Base telling me that, hey, we got a phone call from the soon-to-be Chief of Staff of the Air Force's office, and he's going to notify whoever it was on that short list whether or not they're going to be the next chief. It so happens that was June 15th, 2020, my birthday. And I remember thinking, oh, okay, well, now it got real. Okay, like today's the day. We're going to find out. And it was lunchtime. I was like, well, I'm going to go to lunch. You know, I live on base. And so I went home, and, you know, and it occurred to me that, man, you better think about what you're about to say when the soon-to-be Chief of Staff calls you and tells you you're not it, right? Like, because in my mind, I'm like, there's no way, because I know of the other candidates, and they are some of the best leaders that the Air Force has. So I'm thinking it's not it. So I kind of, you know, mentally prepare, like, okay, here's what I'm going to say, you know, if he calls, whenever he calls. And like, so all of a sudden the phone rings, and I'm like, holy crap, right? Okay, so answer the phone. And it was General C.Q. Brown. And he tells me, hey, Chief, I just want to say congratulations. You know, you're going to be the next Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. I didn't plan on what to say when he said that. So I think I blacked out for a minute, you know, and the only thing that I could think to say is, General Brown, sir, you made the right damn decision. And you know, phone, we hang up, and it was an emotional time for me, because again, I'm not thinking in a million years. I mean, I came from humble beginnings back in 1993, banned from every military installation in Hawaii, to here I am at Keesler Air Force Base getting the news that I'm about to be the next Chief Master in the Air Force. And so, you know, I had to hold on the news for about 5 days until it became official. And so it was that Friday that it actually became news, and the announcement went out. And that was a very pivotal day, because all things changed, right? Like, I was just a normal chief, a normal Joe, sitting on Keesler Air Force Base, to all of a sudden there's news articles written about me from the Air Force, and then media picks up. And so that day, even within my exec starts getting phone calls from media outlets across the globe. And she's like, Chief, these media outlets want to know what kind of Asian are you? And all like, it just got weird. And the next day, my sister calls me up, and she's like, dude, you're in Wikipedia. And I'm like, who put me in Wikipedia? And oh, by the way, everything's wrong. That's what I wanted to tell you about that, and my dad's calling me up and, hey, Wikipedia is saying I'm a colonel. I retired as a warrant officer. Can you fix that? And I'm like, dude, I have more things going on because you all of a sudden become kind of this overnight figure and you don't get a playbook.
No.
Right? You're just a normal leader who loves their nation, who loves the people. And now all of a sudden you become, somebody's news topic. And that was, I think I shared with y'all, Lloyd, during that time that was when I learned, as a leader, you have to be very cautious in guarding your eyes and ears, because that's the first time that I learned, don't read the comments.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And Chief Bass became the first ever female senior, chief in any of the branches of service, which is a trendsetter. But with that came a lot more unfair BS. And even Sergeant Major of the Army Grinston tells us the story that when he's announced he's going to pick up his uniforms and he's wearing shorts, cutoffs in the t-shirt, and he takes his daughter to the food court and they're having lunch, and somebody takes their picture and he posts it and like, what a slob, and then says all kinds of mean things with the woman next to him, which the woman next to him was actually his teenage daughter. So that kind of BS, just unfortunately in today's society it happens, and then when you're an amazing trendsetter icon, this big thing you did, unfortunately you get a lot of that scrutiny, but you were able to handle it with grace. So I saw personally how you handled it. I was far retired, by the way, but I remember following it and just thinking, wow, what an amazing job she's doing. And then I remember thinking she must be leaning on faith as well. I remember having that thought, and to hear that you were is pretty cool. So now you're the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. Will look like in the weeks before the job, did the former Chief Master Sergeants of the Air Force, did you have any relationships with any of them? Did they reach out to kind of help mentor you?
Yeah, they sure did. And for me, I knew that I needed to hear their perspectives. And so I made it a point to call every single one of them and just spend some time listening to them about when they served, what advice do they have for me based off of their time in service. And so I spoke to every single former Chief Master Sergeant in the Air Force. I spent a lot of time reaching out to current serving Air Force leaders to help understand the landscape in a way that would be helpful when I went to the Pentagon. And then I'll never forget driving from Mississippi to the Pentagon. My husband's in one car, I'm in another car, and we're going up 95. And we have the discussion on how do we make sure on this particular tour that we're told how hard it is on families and how, technically Chief Master in the Air Force is on the road a lot. So the question that we had for each other is, how do we fortify our family so that through this, we can still come out on top? And that was one of the kind of the going in goals also was for us, that if we can show today's modern military family that you can still serve and still be a spouse and still be a parent, that was winning for us. Because in the past, we, the Bass family, certainly didn't look like what the mold was before, right? We were dual working, dual military, kids still in the house. And I've seen the shift in my 30 years of more single service members to what we know now is more dual working, more dual military, more single parents, more all the things. So it was important to us that we were able to model that as a family and still come out on top. So those are some of the discussions that we had leading up into. And then, of course, some discussions I had with General Brown to make sure that I understood his mission and vision and priorities so that we could line up. So I had to build my team.
Yeah. How many days did you spend on the road each year in that role?
I don't know. I probably need to ask my team. I think it was somewhere around between 200 and 300.
Wow. That's even more than the loadmaster. Holy cow, that's a lot. So what did you love about that job?
So I love the fact that I was able to help shape the trajectory of the United States Air Force and do so with our airmen in mind, with our airmen and their families in mind. And so one core principle that has always been with me is never forget where you came from. And so all of the lessons that I learned and all the experiences that I had helped shape me so that I could then shape the trajectory of what we needed to do. And some of the focus areas I had is we've got to change the way we look at talent management and people operations. And that's kind of all A1 stuff. And the people operations piece I would offer is applicable to any organization in the world. If you're still doing HR practices in the way that you've done in the 90s, then we're probably wrong. And by and large, our Air Force, while we're the best Air Force in the world, a lot of our people stuff was still things like it was when I grew up, right? Like even the way that we educate, with Airman Leadership School, NCO Academy, Senior NCO Academy, it was fundamentally the same when I came in. And so if we don't change the way that we look at assignments, if we don't change the way that we look at promotions, if we don't change the way we look at recruiting, again, all people stuff to make sure that it makes sense in the year that we're in, we're going to lose talent. And so in order for our military to continue being the strongest military in the world, we have to create a place where people are excited to join and our people policies are there and they create an environment where people want to stay in.
Yeah, that's amazing. So beside being on the road 300 days a year, what was some of the toughest elements of that job?
Goodness. Some of the toughest elements were obviously you can't control certain things like suicide, right? Like you can help set the conditions and policies and things like that, but you can't directly stop it. And so that was tough, aggregating all of those things and not feeling like you can really do something. So that stuck with me. The other thing that was probably really challenging was, you talked about it, the information digital space. Yeah. We're in an environment where anybody and everybody can be a keyboard warrior. In fact, they were, right? Like there were times where people would say, hey, she doesn't care about suicide, right? And I'm like, that's complete garbage. Yeah. But those keyboard warriors, and I had my fair share of bullying. In fact, I didn't even really think until I became Chief Master in the Air Force, I hadn't paid much attention to misogyny. I didn't even fully believe probably that it was a thing, right? Like I grew up old school where just keep your head down, right? Assimilate and blah, blah, blah. But what I learned is there are actually people in the world who do not like me because I'm a woman. Yeah. There are people in the world who do not want to see a woman leading or a woman executing and accomplishing anything. And that was a reality that was a shock. I mean, I had websites built about me, like just horrible things, if nothing but because I was a woman. So it helped me understand the landscape a little bit so that I can make sure that because addressed it, because we don't hide behind stuff. We've got to just kind of put it out in the open and bring some light to it. And so I led during a time where we had to start to create some cyber policies and give people some right and left boundaries, because by and large, if you serve in the military, you understand respect on duty and off duty. We all know that. We understand respect in uniform and out of uniform. We understand that. But what we didn't get is understanding respect online versus offline. And so that is where we needed to spend some time to tell our service members, you are always an ambassador, whether you're in uniform, out of uniform, online, offline, like customs, courtesies, respect all matter.
That was a gap in the Air Force and the military as a whole for a very, very long time. So I was glad to see it addressed. And I think you were able to, through your actions and through your leadership, and you and General Brown, you were able to showcase what true leadership looked like and overcome those haters that were out there. So kudos on you. What about testifying in front of Congress? I know Sergeant Major of the Army Grinston, that was like we had an opportunity to go to dinner together, and he talked about how horrible it was, and he talked about it in the podcast, and he's going to be at the Atlanta Summit here next week, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it as well with him. Was it as horrible for you?
Yes, but our goal was to make sure that all the questions went to the Army. Because if we keep pointing that way, then Grinston was taking all of it. No, it actually wasn't. I'm a little bit strange where, and maybe it's now because I'm almost 2 years removed that it all seems glorious. Certainly, there's a lot of preparation, and that is not fun. Like preparing for testimony is like no other test you've ever done because the stakes are high. And why I say that is, for me, when I prepared for testimony, I'm essentially there on behalf of all of the men and women who serve in the Air Force, and I've got to do right by them. And so that means you've got to be prepared to answer questions regarding infrastructure, regarding childcare, regarding healthcare, anything, you name it. And so you have to essentially be an expert in all of those things, or at least be very well versed and familiar with it. The other thing is you're talking with congressional leaders who, by and large, love and support their military, but they also have, a community that they've got to support. And so you saw some level of theatrics, right? And I remember during one of my testimonies just getting cussed out by one of the folks about base housing. And I'm like, JoAnne Bass does not control base housing and mold, right? But I got it. Yeah. And I learned that again, they're great Americans, it's kind of just what it is. But I loved the opportunity to be bold and to share truth with those congressional leaders so that they can help make a difference, and also point out when they weren't being helpful. Yeah. And so I appreciated an opportunity because, again, I grew up old school, especially in special ops. Communication, even if it's feisty and testy, is better than no communication at all. And so I'd rather have the opportunity to share truth with those leaders. And so we did. But again, the one goal is to, again, make sure that Sergeant Major of the Army Grinston got all the...
Ask him. So, yeah, a great answer. So you had this amazing stint as a Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. And now I want to talk about life after the Air Force for you. So you retire. Did you guys stay in the DC area? Did you move somewhere else?
Yeah, no, we did. We stayed in the area. What's interesting is everybody used to always ask me, what do you want to do when you get out and you're retired? And I don't know that I felt like I had a great answer. I didn't know necessarily what I wanted to do, but I know what I didn't want to do. And I tend to like to reflect and write down my thoughts. And I bend them out in my thoughts into kind of three things. And what I learned that everything that I did in the future would fall in all three of these bins. They would have to be something that I'm good at doing, something that I love to do, and something that makes a difference. And so for me, when I thought about the things that I would do post-military, if it wasn't something I was good at or loved to do or made a difference, and I just wasn't going to do it. And so that's kind of how I've gauged whether I stay involved in something or not. I haven't changed in my passion. I'm still very focused on national security, and I'm still very focused on people. And so that's really the space that I'm in. All things kind of lead to how do we continue to make sure that we have a safe and secure and prosperous nation for your children, for my children. And then how do we grow and develop the people, whether you're in uniform or out of uniform, whether you're in fifth grade or not, how do we grow the people to help with national security. And so that's kind of the space that I'm in, and I love it. And so I do a lot of nonprofit work as well as strategic advising, university, shout out to Columbia Southern University. And then I do some advising to C-suite leaders.
Very nice. So what do you and Ron like to do for fun?
We like to go to Barnes and Noble and read. What's sad is I'm like, that's something we've done since Fort Bragg days. And we're like, how have we become so lame that like the perfect date for us is literally like going to Barnes and Noble, going to their cafe, grabbing a drink, and reading a bunch of books or magazines. Like that is literally what we love to do. But we also love to travel. Okay. So I'm doing a ton of traveling in this time, and I'm spreading it out. Like I took my daughters to Hawaii twice last year. We're doing quite a few vacations this year. So we are traveling and living our best life, Lloyd.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to Scotland for the Edinburgh tattoo in August with Mark Riley, which I think you might know Mark.
I do know Mark.
Runs the Washington tattoo. So you guys are welcome to join us. We're making it we're going to make it a big event and have a group of people.
Oh yeah, you need to tell me about those details. I'll be in Scotland doing a yomp with the Robert Irvine Foundation in June. So if you want to yomp 25, 30, or 50 miles, you just let me know.
The Tango Tango podcast is proudly sponsored by Supply Chain Now. Join the Tango Tango community for more inspiring stories. Follow us on Facebook, X, and LinkedIn. Subscribe to the Tango Tango YouTube channel and follow and listen to Tango Tango wherever you get your podcasts.